Thank you all for attending. Tonight's very special guest is Microsoft's James Montemagno. He's a principal program manager, speaking mainly with the Xamarin team. And I'll let him introduce himself because he'll do it much better than I. At this point, I'm going to turn it over to you, James.
Awesome. Hey, Chris, are you able to post a link over on the virtual meetup? There's a few comments on there for people looking to join.
Yeah, I'll get over to that.
Yeah, I just posted it there directly for you in the chat. Cool. Yeah, so let me go ahead and share my screen. Here we go. Cool. It's recording. Perfect. All right. How do I share my screen? Oh, there it is. Perfect. Screen one. It's like I don't know how to use Teams. There we go. Cool. All right. Cool. Yeah, I definitely do want to talk a little bit about the .NET Virtual User Group. This is really cool. It's an initiative that myself and my colleague John Galloway submitted to the .NET Foundation. It's really cool because obviously since we're in the times of all virtual user groups all over the globe, it's been really fascinating to like watch so many user groups go online, use different pieces of technologies. But I don't know if you're like me, I often want to attend a bunch of different user groups, but the problem I have is that I got to go join 100 different user groups. And I kind of feel bad in a way because I'm never going to probably, be able to attend a lot of those in person, in the next 5 years when we're able to meet it back up again. So we created this with the foundation, the .NET Virtual User Group, to promote all of these cool virtual events. So you'll see a bunch of these upcoming here all throughout the month. So any user group organizer can go ahead and submit it, one on there. So you only have to join one user group and boom, you're good to go. Let me go ahead and get this back over here. And let me click this over here so I can see stuff. And you can see my screen, right?
Yes, we can. And I've added the link to the .NET Virtual User Group.
Perfect. Thank you. So it's really cool. And you can just kind of go through there. And I will be monitoring the chat room as well. I'll just leave it up on my left monitor. So if you have any questions, so come say hi. And you can also leave cool emojis like awesome. And then I'll tell you like watch those in the Teams chat. Cool. All right. So let me go and get on my slides. Boom. Cool. All right. Put this over here. Perfect. And this over here. Like Chris said, I'm James Montemagno. I'm a lead program manager for the .NET community over at Microsoft. My focus is primarily on Xamarin. I came from the Xamarin team as a developer evangelist, coming over into Microsoft as a program manager on the Xamarin team, and sort of expanding my role at Microsoft, ensuring the vibrancy and helping the community grow and thrive across all .NET workloads and products, including Xamarin. So it's kind of this long journey from being a Xamarin customer to working at Xamarin to working on the Xamarin product at Microsoft, and now helping the success of the entire .NET community. But like Chris said, Xamarin is my passion. That's what I live and thrive on, and I still work on many products every single day at Microsoft on the core team, so Xamarin Essentials and a few other things. And I love developing. I think, as a lot of people grow in their careers and you become managers or you move on to different roles in the business sector, you don't get to code as much as you would like to. And I know I definitely don't code as much as I would like to, but I still have this deep passion for the technology I found over a decade ago, which was building mobile applications with Xamarin. So I continue to do that. And the nice part about that is that I get to tell my story in a way of awesome things that I've built. I get to give awesome presentations on it and sort of live what all of you maybe are looking to build and help you be successful too. So my journey sort of started off with this holiday going into COVID, that Nintendo, for the Nintendo Switch, launched Animal Crossing, which is a sort of like Sims type of game if you haven't played it, but you have a character that you sort of live and there's all these animals on the island and you're cleaning it up and you're building your home and you're customizing it. And it's really fun because I could never get my wife into games, and it's one thing that she just immediately got sucked into and spent hundreds of hours on it just like I did. And there's a really fun part of the game, which is this sort of exchange market, like a stock exchange market. But instead of buying and selling like stocks of companies, you're buying and selling turnips on the island. And the idea is that every day on every single island out there, the turnips change prices. So your idea is to buy low and sell high and go to other people's islands, or hopefully maybe even your island, and take your turnips, visit them virtually, and then sell them. So what happened is I started playing the game, and I then immediately found a bunch of friends that had Google Excel spreadsheets and text message threads and Slack channels, and we're all trying to like update constantly. And I was like, there's got to be a better way to share your numbers, your turnip prices every day with all of your friends, because I can't have all these text message threads going back and forth and when I can visit, when I can't visit. And I was like, well, I'm a mobile developer, so I'm going to build an app. And that's what I did. I built Island Tracker, which is an app for Animal Crossing that enables you to have a friends list. So it's like a little social network. It allows you to update in the morning, in the afternoon, your turnip prices, and your friends can see them automatically inside of their application. And then also you can do other things like notify your friends when you're playing the game. And you can also get predictions with an algorithm that will tell you if it thinks your turnip prices are going to go up or down. Luckily, the algorithm isn't that crazy complex, and a bunch of really smart people reverse engineered it in the game. So this is what I went out to go build. And this is actually a screenshot from the game on my the app on my website. But it was this long journey where I was an independent developer at this time, making it in my side spare time. And I wanted to ensure that I could create a beautiful application, release it to the App Store, productize it, sell it, and get feedback from customers, and also keep my costs really low because I didn't want really heavy server costs at the end of the day. So I combined a bunch of different pieces of technology and created Island Tracker, and that's what I'm going to be talking about tonight. So my goals of this application are pretty straightforward. I wanted a very good-looking cross-platform application for iOS and Android. While I thought about going to the desktop, at first, I really just wanted to really target just on iOS and Android. I'm an Android user and I'm an iOS user. My wife is an iOS user, so at the time I really wanted to ensure cross-platform would work really well and that they would look and perform similarly. I wanted these weekly turnip prices and predictions. I obviously wanted to synchronize data. I think this was like the biggest part of the application is I needed to not only synchronize data, but I also needed users to have a profile that they could synchronize with the backend. And I never really worked beyond demoware with this before. If you've seen any of my other presentations or blog posts, I often show like Twitter authentication or Microsoft authentication, but I've never really published a real world application doing this sort of data synchronization for users. So this was something that I really needed to get a grasp on beyond demoware if I was going to ship this. The other thing is I needed a friend system. This is fascinating because we all use other social networks, maybe like Instagram or Twitter or Facebook or LinkedIn. And you have to sign up for an account and you have friends. And I needed to think, how does friends codes work? And how does this, actually work in the real world? And who requests a friend request? And how do you grant it? And how do you make sure that people don't spam other users with friend requests? And I also had this weird goal in my mind that I didn't want anyone to have to log in to use my application. And I'll get to that later, which became another fascinating part because I didn't want to introduce complexity into my app. I wanted it to be simple. You could just start using it. And of course, here, synchronizing your own data is important, but your friends needed to be able to see that data too. So ensuring that only people that are your friends could see your data was important. And then I wanted to make sure that I was picking platforms and technologies that enabled me to send, push notifications, desktop support, widgets, things that I wanted to do there. So those are my goals of the application. It wasn't too complex. However, there's a lot of things going on here, right? There's a friend system, there's data synchronization, you got to store the data somewhere, and you have to build the user interface and of course publish it too. So at a high level, these were my goals. And when it came to building the application, I chose Xamarin and Xamarin.Forms to do that. Obviously, I'm a C# developer. I came from working at Xamarin as an evangelist, but I fell in love 10 years ago building applications with Xamarin, and I continue to this day. And the goal of Xamarin, if you are brand new to learning about Xamarin, is that it's all about building native cross-platform applications and sharing a bulk, if not all, of your business logic, your native integrations, and your user interface. So the idea is that you have your iOS and Android head projects, and then you can share code with other .NET things too. And normally you would share your business logic like models, view models, but built into the Xamarin ecosystem are two important libraries. First is Xamarin Essentials, which gives you access to native APIs cross-platform. So things like connectivity, the keychain, email, SMS, opening the browser, for example. Those are all built in to a cross-platform API. And then Xamarin.Forms, which is a cross-platform native user interface. So Xamarin Essentials brings the APIs of iOS, Android cross-platform. Xamarin.Forms brings the UI cross-platform. And of course, you can share your C# business logic with any of your applications. So this is a really cool way of building applications cross-platform. And this is what I did. And this is what I built. This is what it looks like. And we'll be demoing it a lot tonight. On the left-hand side, you have the Android version. And on the right-hand side, you have the iOS version. And surprisingly, they don't look very different. There's really niceties of using Xamarin is that you are getting the native controls and features and capabilities, but you have the customization to make them as similar, as different as you want. You have the options on Android of using top tabs or bottom tabs or flyout menus and using native looking buttons or having buttons that look exactly the same like I did here and styling them to be how you want your UI controls to be. And really the only biggest difference that you see on these screens is a little bit of spacing, but probably the emojis, because on Android it uses Android emojis and iOS it uses iOS emojis. But that is kind of one nicety, is that here I'm using custom fonts, I'm using some custom controls that I'll talk about. But to my users and for my end result publishing it, you get this sort of really beautiful, elegant user interface. Here I have grouping going on, and I have different toggles that we'll see here as well. So let me go ahead and continue on. So go ahead and, all right, cool. So one of the coolest parts of Xamarin and Xamarin.Forms, besides building the user interface, is a newer API that I took advantage of in building this application called Xamarin.Forms Shell. And the idea of Xamarin.Forms Shell is of simplifying the structure of your application. So normally, structures of applications are fragmented. You have to string together pages, navigate to them explicitly, create new objects. It's not quite elegant in a way, or it's kind of manual construction. Xamarin.Forms Shell says, well, what if Xamarin.Forms had an opinionated way of building and displaying and organizing your application? And at the same time, what if you were able to take advantage of some other services, such as maybe URL-based navigation, so you could push and pop pages elegantly just using URLs, just like how the internet works, but on your mobile device. So some of the really cool parts about Shell is that it gives you the ability to immediately be productive with flyout navigation, bottom tabs or top tabs, structuring your application with only a few lines of code changing. Whether you just want to fly out or tabs, it's really, really simple to get this user interface, and it's consistent across platform. So for example, on my application here, on the left-hand side, what you see is the actual Island Tracker home screen. And inside of my shell, I have a tab bar, which is this bottom tab with 3 tabs. And here I can give it an icon, which I'm using font icons here to display. And I give it this piece of shell content. So you see it right here, a home page, tracking page, and friends page. So in literally about 10 or 15 lines of XAML, I not only have the entirety of my application, the lazy load construction of each page inside of it on demand, but I've also set up URL routes. So we see route home, route tracking, route friends. So I don't have to new up pages. I can say, go to home, and automatically Xamarin.Forms will know to navigate to that page. And I can additionally pass parameters, which is a really cool aspect of it. So some of the things that I use heavily inside of this application before I even get into the demo of it is some of the built-in controls with Xamarin.Forms. So on the Friends page here, I use the brand new collection view and swipe view that are built directly in. So this enables me to have grouping. So I have older updates, newer updates. I added custom swipe actions, which is a swipe view, which is built right into Xamarin.Forms. So I could enable people to remove friends, see their friend code, and you get the exact same type of UI that developer or normal users are used to. Additionally, not only did I use tons of great things like Xamarin.Forms shell and swipe view and collection view, but I used awesome community controls. And I think this is one of the really big benefits of using Xamarin, is that it's been around for over a decade. Xamarin.Forms for over nearly six and a half years at this point, and there's this thriving ecosystem of developers building libraries and controls. So one of the cool parts here is that I was able to use a lot of these things inside of my application. And the first one was Pancake View, which is an awesome control by Stephen Thwysen, and it's sort of like a custom card. And where I use it here is actually on a few different controls. The first one is this background with the curvature on the top. That enables me to kind of create this background card that kind of slides up as you scroll the entire screen. And also this home button on the top right. You can customize any of the corner radiuses. It has gradient support built in, and it's really, really elegant to use. The other one I use, which is very similar in a way to Pancake View, but it's a material frame. And these are what I use for any of the interactable cards that have this cool acrylic mode on it. And the acrylic mode is specifically just a theme. So they have built-in light theme, dark theme, and this acrylic mode that I thought just looked really cool drop shadows that are on here from the community. And also all of these different elements are interactable. So instead of just having a button, I just added a click handler to each of these different sort of material frames that were rendered on the screen. So using these custom controls from the community, I didn't have to write anything myself. I just used it like I would any other control. And then I get that consistent look across iOS and Android, which I think is pretty fantastic. I also used a bunch of controls from Syncfusion. So we have amazing control vendors like Telerix, Syncfusion, DevExpress, Grape City, and a bunch of others. And I've been a fan of Syncfusion back from when I worked at Canon writing printer software. We use Syncfusion there. And they have some really fantastic controls for Xamarin.Forms. So for example, here I use a bunch of their custom controls, like this input layout where I'm saying how many hours I'm open, up and down, a masked entry. I'm also using their combo box on the drop down here. You'll see the emoji status is one of those kind of swishy UIs, but you see that drop down there, and you can see the dodo code moves up to the top, and that's all basically for free. Based in there. And the effects view, when I actually tap on that sync button, you get that nice little ripple effect. So we'll have it play one more time here and I'll move on. But the nice thing is that I just use normal controls, right? I get this really elegant, beautiful, consistent UI by using things that are in the box and additionally using the ecosystem that's out there. I also use the tried and true Syncfusion chart controls that they're kind of known for here. But here I can see that up top I have the chart or the chart view here where users can get their predictions, and I also use their expander view, which has a nice animation built in. There is now an expander view built into Xamarin.Forms, but at the time there wasn't. So it was nice to kind of have this here. And as I go through the application and use it, you'll see a lot of these elements intact. But what I wanted to do is walk through the different elements of the UI because I didn't have to build anything custom. And that was one of the kind of most fascinating parts of this application is I don't have any custom renderers. I maybe have one or two that don't do it. I'll have to look at the code when we go through it, and I'll walk through what's actually in there. But from my remembrance, I basically have no custom code that I wrote myself for user interface. It's all either stock or from the community or from Syncfusion. And they also have a free community license, which is what I use because I make under $1 million. So that's good. I hope to use their free community edition for a long, long time. Some other helpful packages in this creation leading up to getting the application to a useful point is a few different other packages that are out in the ecosystem. The first is MVVM helpers. This is a library that I wrote, and it enables very, very simple, straightforward helper classes for any application. I have things like an observable object that implement iNotify property change for you, an async command, which enables you to run tasks in a command and handle all of their exception handling, and an observable range collection that allows you to insert, update, and remove chunks of data. The other thing I used was a really cool NuGet library called Resizetizer. And Resizetizer is from one of our engineers at Microsoft. Let me go ahead and mute you here. Kurt, sorry. Is Resizetizer, which is a cross-platform automatic resizing of images. And I'll show you that in the code. But it enables you to add SVGs or PNGs, and it will automatically resize them to all the different resolutions for iOS and Android and Windows. Another thing that I used was Font Awesome. Built into Xamarin.Forms is really simple embedded fonts. So I used Font Awesome and custom fonts in here, and that's what I use for almost all my icons and images inside of the application. So instead of having to generate tons of art assets, I just use Font Awesome here inside of the application. And then finally is a library, another library I wrote. I'm not trying to toot my own horn, but it is an application that I use, which is called Resizetizer. And is Monkey Cache. And Monkey Cache is it's not a database. I made that very clear when I built the library, but the idea is it's a data caching and storage solution for simple data that's stored in like JSON files, basically. So the idea of it is any web requests that you maybe want to cache for a few minutes or user data that you want to cache that can be thrown away technically can be stored in Monkey Cache, and you easily add and remove data to it. You do have the storage of doing long-term storage as well in it, although it's not recommended, even though that's what I used in my application. And you can use that in Monkey Cache, which is quite nice. So that's the main application. So that's the idea of like what I needed to put into it, what I use in building the application. But I also needed to develop a backend, right? So I was able to leverage Xamarin, Xamarin.Forms, Xamarin Essentials, and all these amazing libraries from the community, but I also needed to develop a backend. And this was kind of a struggle for me because traditionally I'm not a backend developer. I like to use out-of-the-box solutions. So it was sort of a struggle for me. And the thing I wanted to use was not traditional. I wanted to not have any servers. I didn't want to have any databases, and I wanted it to be super affordable. That was sort of my goal here in general. And that's really complicated because how do you not have any servers and how do you not have any databases? And that was something I wanted to think about, is I didn't want to have to worry about SQL servers, and I didn't want to have to worry about server and web APIs that were talking to said SQL server and write all that code. So I did a lot of research and investigation here of, hey, I built the application and I can do all this stuff, but I need to talk to something. And that's where Azure Functions came in. And Azure Functions are really neat because they're event-driven compute. They scale on demand. And while they're called serverless, serverless compute and serverless functions, there is obviously a server somewhere computing some data, but it enables you to pay for only what you consume. And to me, this was really important. So instead of having worrying about scaling up and scaling down servers and paying for a server that was always on, if no one installed my application, which would kind of stink, I wouldn't have to pay for anything, and that would be a huge benefit. But if it did, then I would only pay for the data that I consumed, and it would scale across regions accordingly. And a bonus is I could develop inside of Visual Studio and Visual Studio for Mac. And it's also really great for mobile apps. I think it's like a hidden gem because it enables you to integrate in this event-driven compute mechanism by having ins and outs. And I'll talk about that here. For example, what Azure Functions can do is they can kind of sit between inputs and outputs. And those inputs and outputs can be many things, and they usually trigger. So for example, you may take a PDF file, add it to blob storage, that triggers a Azure function to execute, and then you do an OCR detection on it to read the text from it, and then put that data into SQL database, for example. Or maybe you have a mobile app that calls a web API that triggers a function that is taking in some data, puts it into Cosmos DB, which then triggers another function, which then maybe sends a push notification, which is a really cool scenario. And in my case, what I was going to do is I was going to have my Azure Functions sit in between my beautiful mobile apps and something built into Azure Storage called table storage. It's a really simple NoSQL table storage solution. And that's what I was going to use. So instead of doing SQL Server, instead of doing a Cosmos DB and have to worry about anything, I was going to just have my mobile apps talk to my functions, which could do inputs and outputs. So what I want to do is I'm actually going to show you a little bit of how Azure Functions works, because I think it's important in the context of how my mobile application works. So over here, I'm going to type in function. Let's see if that comes up. Into Visual Studio. I have a lot of templates. Over here, there we go. Azure Functions. There we go. So let's just say I create a new Azure function over here. And what's cool about Azure Functions is that there's all these different types of triggers. So I kind of mentioned them, right? A Cosmos DB trigger, a blob trigger, an IoT trigger, a queue trigger, a SendGrid trigger, a SignalR trigger. And the one that I use heavily is just an HTTP trigger. So HTTP triggers are really cool because it's an HTTP request, sort of like a web API that can do anything. Thomas, I'll get to your question too. It's a good question as well. So here's my function, okay? Where's my zoom? Let me just make sure I'm zoom in. Yep, let's do that there. Cool. So here, this is an Azure function. And what it's telling it is that this Azure function is going to accept a get or a post. And it is going to read out a query name, and it's going to take that data, it's going to read it, deserialize that data, and then it is going to output it as a response that says, hello, blah, 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 this is an HTTP trigger. So the trigger, a part of it is a get or a post to this URL. And you can really specify those in your functions however you want. So if I just run this locally here, I am going to run it locally, which I think is really cool. So I can test these over here. Oops, I need to, I'm already running another function. So let me close that function. Boop, there we go. So I'll run this one here. And what's neat is that my function is just running here. Localhost 7071 API function 1. I can literally go in, copy that, and it knows I'm ready to go. So if I go ahead and open a browser over here, type it in, the first thing that I can do is just call the function. And we can see it gets triggered right away. I log some information. And what we're going to note here is if I just debug through is that I didn't give it any arguments. So there's no name associated with it here if I zoom in. So there's no data, anything like that. So this is going to just say that the function triggered successfully, but I didn't give it a name yet. So let's go ahead and continue on. And we'll see here, if I zoom in, that it says an HTTP trigger was successful, but I didn't pass it a name. So what I can do up here is I can do name equals James, hit enter. Now over here, I can go ahead and go through and I can see that James is the name. And as I continue through, it will kind of debug some stuff. And my output response is hello, James, blah, 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 blah. Now, what's neat here is that that's just very simple HTTP, but the power of Azure Functions is the input and output. So while this function is cool, I actually have another function that really describes the power of what a function can behold onto the world. So this function, let me go ahead and pull it over here, has an input and an output. And this is really neat. So this function, again, called function1, it's a beautiful name for it. It has a trigger of blob trigger. So what this says is that whenever I add a blob, any data, into my Azure storage in this folder, samples works items, I'm going to be able to read that blob in. And I'm also going to say, I am going to be outputting a blob to processed/name. So these are parameters that I automatically get from this Azure function. So whatever the name of the file is, I will get it, and I'm telling it that I'm going to output it to the same exact name. But what's really neat is that I can also give it other files, other blobs, other reads. I could read files, I could read queues, I could read tables inside of here, which we'll see in the application. So what this app does is it reads the blob that came in, it reads it to the end, and then it appends hello from code onto it, and it writes it to the output blob, which is really cool. So if I run this over here, this is going to run my function. I have a test.txt here, and it just says hello world. And you can see I have one function, it's a blob trigger. And there's this awesome application that you can get for both Mac, Windows, and Linux, so all of them. And it's the Azure Storage Explorer. And it'll show you all your stuff in Azure, but it'll also show you all of your stuff locally too. So here's my sample work items, and there's just a new text document here. But let me go ahead and add a breakpoint here. There we go. And what I'm going to do is just drag and drop this file into blob storage. It's going to upload it locally on my machine over here. And boom, I literally hit a breakpoint because I've gone ahead and I've read in this file onto disk. So hello world. And what's cool here is that I have a stream that I can just write data to. So I'm just getting the bytes here, writing it out, and I don't have to create the file, do anything on the file, anything like that. I just get it back automatically. So when I go ahead and continue here, what we're going to see is if I go into processed, I get a test.txt. I can double click on that. It's going to download it from my local server and then open it. And boom, hello world, hello from code. So I got a trigger. I had an input, which was the blob, and my output was this. So the cool part here is that you can have multiple inputs, multiple outputs, and you can have a trigger, and you can combine these. So if I wanted to change this over here, and I wanted this to be an HTTP trigger, I could still write output to the blob, for example. I could have blobs, and I could pass in a parameter, and I could send that across the wire, which is cool. And I'll show you what this looks like when I get into debugging the main application. So Those are Azure Functions, and they're super duper powerful, especially combined here inside of my Storage Explorer. So let me get to a good question from Thomas. Let me see if I have this here. Yeah. So let me get to Thomas here because it's a good question about offline data storage, because table storage is very simple NoSQL data. There's no library out there that automatically, as far as I know, that does like automatic online offline data synchronization for table storage. So it's something to sort of think about in general. So what I use in my application is I use my Monkey Cache library that I talked about earlier, and I'll show you this in code. And what this does is it enables me to make a RESTful service call to the Azure function to, let's say, get all my friends' data and store that entire response locally. So if I go ahead and I get that data again, and I make that web request and I'm offline, I check to see if I'm offline first. And if I am, just return the cached version of it. Now, inside of this application, when we get to the demo of it, you'll see that I have a sync button, and that sync button just takes any of my local data, shoves it up into the storage and overrides whatever's there. So it's the last one in wins and overwrites anything. But that is one thing there. So it's a good question, Thomas, on that. Is the table storage explorer is sort of the ultimate sharing of it. But if I'm offline, I use my Monkey Cache library to store all of my data, any web requests I've ever made, into storage. And I'll show you how easy it is. It takes like 3 lines of code. So that's a function. I have my app, but I need to create this backend, right? And I need to be able to share data. Well, I don't want to make anything easy, so I make everything more complex for myself. But I thought about, like, well, what is a user and how do I share data? Well, normally a user is an account that we would create, or I would log in with Twitter or Facebook or some other mechanism. I sort of get an email address back. And I thought to myself, man, I don't really want to log into Facebook ever again in my life, and I don't want to create a login button. And what if, like, the Facebook library gets out of date, or I got a Twitter API changes? I'm like, oh man, like, what if they log in with different things, and how does this work? So I had a long conversation with my friend Frank Kruger, who I do a podcast with, Merge Conflict, and he said, well, what if users were just keys? They were just randomly generated GUIDs. And I said, well, what is a user at the end of the day? And what is an account? Well, it's an ID, and it's a unique ID. And what else is a unique ID? A GUID, or GUID, Global Unique Identifier, or UUID. You know, either way you look at it, GUID or UUID. So I thought to myself, well, that's fascinating. Well, how would that work in the real world if users weren't accounts from third party or my own account in a database? And what if they were just random strings of numbers that they didn't have to care about, that were just used in my database? So I thought about this, and Frank and I plotted this out, and we said, well, every user is going to have 2 keys, or 2 GUIDs, a private key and a public key. It's kind of fascinating. Public key would be like your username almost. It would be a way of identifying a user's account. And the private key would be private to the app and the server. So it's sort of this, the 2 of them together are used in a way that can unlock the data. But a public key could be used to send and receive friend requests, and also ask for data about a user. As long as the user has your public key and you've already made a friendship, then that's all you need. You don't need their private key. You don't need any more information. It's just the same exact sort of behind the scenes of how Facebook works, like, or Twitter, like more Facebook, right? Facebook, you request to be someone's friends, they accept you. That's the system I wanted to create. So if you can see my public key, you can request a friend request, and then we'll unlock the potential. So private server communication if you send me your private key in a header, that will unlock so you can do CRUD operations on your data. That's what I wanted, right? So that's the private. Public, friend system, sharing data with friends. It comes into that magical world there. Now these GUIDs, they'll be generated automatically when the app is created, and you'll have a way of exporting them in and out of your app. So run into some issues here. I mean, it's always easier to just re-sign into something, if you get a new device instead of exporting and importing. But I thought, we'll just give this a go and see how it works. But the cool part here is that these GUIDs are generated the second the app is started. So the user has to do nothing to start using the app. And they're automatically stored in the keychain using Xamarin Essentials Secure Storage. So I don't have to write any code besides get and set keys inside of here. And like I said, they're tied to the device and they can be transferred in and out via email. It's just a unique code that I generate here. So let me show you how this works in this backend here. And let me walk through some of the code samples. So I'm going to open up Visual Studio over here. And I want to show you the solution that we have over here. All right, cool. So let me go ahead and trim down some of these here. Perfect. All right, cool. So what we have over here is my solution that I call Turnip Tracker. That was the original name of the application. And I have a few things in here. I have a Azure function. So these are all my Azure functions in the back end. Friend requests, profile, turnip updates. We'll get to those in a second. And then here on the bottom, I have three projects. I have my Android and iOS app. So just my standard head projects. And then here, this stuff is my shared code with my mobile apps. So it's my mobile shared code. So things like my models, my views, my view models, my services here, and then any of my control theming or converters in here. But a fascinating part is that I have this additional shared project. And the nice part about using C# everywhere with my backend, whether it's a function or a website, and Xamarin for mobile apps, is that I get to share my data objects between my mobile apps and my backend. So here, my user is consistent. My friend requests, and pending friend requests are all the same. I look like I'm doing some NFL game here or something like that with all these check marks, soccer matches, if you will. And so this is kind of fascinating that I have a bunch of solutions, but I'm sharing a bunch of code between my Azure functions and my mobile apps, which I think is really unique. Now, what I have inside of here is, let's first look at the mobile app, is a bunch of just normal MVVM type of stuff, because that's the type of developer I am. I think I opened up something. There we go. Close a bunch of these. And I'll talk through these really quick. So yeah, if we look here, look at this. Oh, I do have one renderer. I have a borderless. I don't even use this, but I have like 3 lines of code. But down here, I have my Android, iOS project, and there's like no code inside of here. So minimal, just in general. But everything else is up inside of this project up here. So I'm just going to zoom in and just kind of look at these really quick. So I have my island tracker. I have my own model. So this is model that I'm storing only in my application, like my prediction, my profile, my fruits, my days that I have. So very simple data objects. I have some images here, like the fruit that I used. And this is, and my fonts here that are all inside of my project. And these are using Resizetizer to resize these images. And then I have custom fonts here. And inside the world of Xamarin.Forms, we have these export fonts. So we can see I just easily can use fonts with a single line of code. That's cool. And then here I have all of my models, and I said view models and views. So I have an about view, an about page, a friend request page, a friend request view, et cetera, et cetera. So I have all these just simple XAML user interfaces, my code behind for it, and I have my app shell and my app here as well. Now, I have a few other settings here, like settings service and a data service, and this is where things get fascinating. So over here, for example, when I want to get my public key or private key, I simply can come in and I just sort of store a private key around in cache. So when I'm in debug, I just specify them here manually. But I have this this get key operation. So here, for example, I call into secure storage, part of Xamarin Essentials, and I say get key, and I just get the key. If I don't have a key, I create the key automatically here for me, which is cool. But I have other settings coming from preferences, so they don't need to be encrypted at all. Like, am I the first run? Did I need to update my profile? Am I a pro user? Have I registered? Is this my first friend request? Should I hide the first time buying? Should I automatically refresh friends? Or should I refresh after so many hours? Like, so all of these are just like user settings in my application. The fascinating part to what Thomas was sort of talking about is calling the backend and saving data. And that's where my data service comes in. So my data service here is where I do all of my logic talking to my Azure Functions backend. So what I do here is I create an HTTP client. Here, this barrel, that's monkey cache. That's me saying I would like to create a barrel that I put in data back and forth that I can access. And if I look at, let's say, for example, let me go ahead and get some data here, like upsert user profile. And that'll be like one of the first things that we do is either create or update a profile. So when I upsert a profile, what I do here is I get my user. That's what's the data model that's shared between my back end and my front end. It's from my current profile. And what I do is I see if I've registered or not. And if I have registered, then I'm going to get my user, serialize it, and correct barrel of monkeys. And then I do a put async. Else, I'm going to do a post async, right? So I try to follow really RESTful calls here of either doing a put to update profile or call create profile and pass in this data. And if we look at what this does over here, this goes ahead and it just makes a web request. I set the content. Over here, I also do this set heading. Let me peek definition. And what this does is it sets the authorization bearer token to my private key. So that's how I do the authentication on my back end, which is cool. And then I just get my response and I check for error codes. The more fascinating one is my, where's my get at? Post get async. Here we go. So this here is the entirety of online offline synchronization. All of it. All of it. This is how you do online synchronization in like no lines of code. It's all data caching, right? I'm not storing a local database, but I'm caching data locally for my instance. So this is great when I just want to store data simply and make sure if I'm online or offline. So here's what I do is I check to see if I do not have internet. And if I don't have internet, then I'm going to go ahead and ask the barrel for the key. And the key is the URL. So that is always the same thing, the URL here. Else, if I do have internet, I'm going to see if that data is expired. And that's one of the features of the monkey cache is you can say expire the data after a minute, a day, 5 days, however long you want it, 1 millisecond, just auto expire. So if it's not expired, or if it is expired, then, if it's not expired, hence this not expired, go ahead and get that data. So if I don't have internet, get the cache. If I'm not expired, get the cache. Then if either of those are true above, this would be false. But let's say I do have internet, and let's say I do have expired data. Well, in that case, go make a web request, say get string asynchronously, pull it down, and then add that data into the barrel and cache it. So if I go ahead and call this get async back to back to back to back, and I'm offline, it is always going to return that cache data. If I'm online, it will return the cache data until that item is expired. And that is how I do online offline data synchronization, all from just a few lines of code. And where this is used, get async, for example, is if I scroll up here, we have our normal CRUD stuff. But if I look up into my data service calls, let me go up here to where's my get async? Oh, I guess I don't call it there. Let me get an example here of where I call it. Get async. There we go. So an example here is, oh, here. There we go. Perfect. I do call it here. Oh, there's a bunch right here. Perfect. So where I did them is get friends, right? Get async. And I say I want an IEnumerable of friend statuses, or I want my current friend request count to come back. And here's the API that I call. Same thing here to get pending friend requests. So if I'm offline, then it's always going to return the same data, right? Over and over and over again until I'm online. So that's how I accomplish that inside of this code. Now, the fascinating part of this is that I also, it's all open source, Richard, as well. It's in my slide deck, but it is also at github.com/james/app AC Island Tracker. All of it is open source. I built it open source too. So there we go. One of the cool parts here is these Azure Functions. So let me just show you something very, very simple, and then we'll demo it and get it actually running here. Is over here, I have sort of grouped these functions together. So you have as many functions as you want in here. So here I have what my user would do. Well, my user is going to create a profile, update a profile, or update their turnip prices. And what each of these are simple HTTP triggers. So everything is a post, put, delete, get, okay? But I want to show you something really neat, which is this cloud table. And this cloud table is the Azure table storage. I'm going to say, hey, give me my user table. And I would like to query data off of this cloud table, or insert data, or update data table automatically. And in fact, there's some of these, such as update turnip prices, not that one, maybe off of remove friend requests. Here we go. Off of like remove friend requests or remove friend, where I get multiple tables. I get a friend and my user table in, and I can process data off of it. And it's really, really neat. In fact, if I look at this create profile, what I do is I call this function, I parse the header information. Over here, I just parse out the user data that's inside of here. I validate that the data is legit inside of here. And then I do a little encryption, decryption stuff for my friend code. But I create this user entity. And this user entity is what's stored in my database. And then my cloud table storage, I already have the cloud table. And what I do is I move this over, is I do an insert or merge operation. I execute that on the table, and it gives me back my data. Like, this is how I store it into the database. Super duper simple. Literally is just a few lines of code, and I'm done. And if I want to update my profile, I basically do the same exact thing, where I get my key, I make sure the data is valid, but this time I find the user entity first, and then I go over here and I create my user entity, and I say merge user entity over here. So I kind of have a way of merging the data in very seamlessly. So let me run this backend and let me show you the application in action, because I think that's really cool to kind of walk through here. Is we have our tables over here, okay? And inside of here, I just created these tables manually. So I said, create a friend table, friend request, user data, and it's NoSQL. So if I add or remove columns in here, it'll automatically update it for me. But we can see here my users, I have, no users inside of here basically. And if we look at my APIs locally, I have all sorts of APIs from that Azure function. I have approve friend request, create profile, get friend requests, get friends, reject friends, remove friends, all this stuff, right? So if I go ahead and zoom out here and open up one of my Android emulators, let's open up the application. So here I'm going to open it up. And you'll see a lot of that like UI work that we'll have seen previously. Here's my Syncfusion pop-up. I haven't created my profile yet. So let's go ahead and create it here. I'm going to say James, and I'll say Pacific Northwest. And I'll say that I'm going to have orange, and I don't have a friends code, so we'll leave it blank, and I'm going to hit create. And we're going to see that over here, my function triggered, and it says create profile was done, which is cool. And if I go back into my table and I hit refresh, sure enough, here is James. Here's my key. So this is actually a private and public key. I have my timestamp, my name, my island name, my fruit code, my emoji status, and a bunch of other stuff that I put in here. If I go ahead and open it again and change some data, let's say I do a, I guess I have to do it in the keyboard, huh? I don't know how to do the emoji on this keyboard. That's not great. How do I do emoji on this keyboard? Oh no. Well, I won't do emoji, I guess, on there, but let's just say I do something else, like have some code, some time duration. I say that this is open and I hit sync. I hit refresh here. We'll see my emoji's gone, but I've also updated some data like my gate status over here and my dodo code as well. If I go into my tracking, there's my UI for the tracking. So I could say I bought my turnips for 100. I can look at like my chart and graph here. If I was to go and update these prices, I get predictions here. So let's say it's 100. Let's say 80. I'll see if it's up or down. Tuesday, we'll say like 70. We'll say 70 again. You know, Wednesday, or I guess here this couldn't be that. Let's say 59. So we get these different predictions, and then I can hit sync. And since today is Tuesday, yes, it is Tuesday, perfect. And I hit sync. We see the sync button. If it's not Tuesday, we don't see the sync button. And sure enough, over here now, I get all my data up inside of here. So I can see my predictions, my AM, PM price, all inside of there, which is really cool. And just like that, I have the ability to put data to and from the server really seamless, no matter what. If I want to change my name, change my island name, change my fruit that's on my island, I can go ahead and do that. And I have this really nice and beautiful UI that I can go ahead and create here. Now, I think that that's cool, but what about this friend functionality? That's like one of the most important parts of this application. So the friend stuff gets actually a little bit complex because I've never created a friend system in my life before. I never had to create a mini social network. And that became fascinating. So I thought of a friend system like this. Again, I sat down with Frank, who helped me with this sort of system. And I said, well, I'm a user. I'm James in this scenario. And that's my Android app, right? So that's my friend there. And let's say I want Chris to be my friend. What I would do is I would send him my friend code. Basically, I would send a link to him and say, like, kind of, here's my profile. Send me a friend request. And here's Chris. He's like, oh, cool. Thanks for the link. That's great. And what he would do is he would basically tap on a button and say, I would like to be your friend, James. And then I, James, back in purple, would get that friend request. And I would say yes or no. Chris, friend, yes, no, we'll see. And if I do approve my friend request, and then we're the best friends in the entire world. Like, that would be pretty awesome. And how I made this work was through friend code deep linking, which I think is a really cool aspect of Xamarin.Forms, but also how I could enable this type of functionality, because I don't have a website. I don't have a username that I can just give somebody, right? It's GUIDs. They're not very pretty. So built into Xamarin.Forms, it has this idea of being able to do URL routing with Xamarin.Forms shell. So I talked about that earlier, where if I want to go to the city, if I have a city list here and I want to go to details, I can say go to detail. Now, if I want to go back, I can just go back with ... But a cooler part is that if I want to go to a specific city, for example, I can pass it the detailed information. So I thought about this and I said, well, what if I could pass data, like I passed the ID here, of my friend code or Chris's friend code to me? I would make it really easy. So, and then I could automatically set these different queries on the page. And that's sort of what I did here is I created this unique friend code via deep linking that I could use in parallel with URL-based navigation. So here's what I would actually send Chris. It's very scary looking. Do not fear. It's not that scary. But the first thing is I have this thing called AC Island Tracker. And that's sort of the unique identifier of my application. And that's how iOS or Android will know to automatically launch my application. Then here, friends invite, I will tell Xamarin.Forms to navigate to friends/invite, and it will automatically go to the friends tab and go to the invite page for me automatically because it's URL-based navigation. And it will send the additional parameters of the unique GUID and a name. So here, Mott's test or whatever you want to append on it, give that to the person. And what's really cool is to actually get this all working takes like one line of code, really. Inside of my app, I get a app link request received when somebody taps or opens in an email and taps on that link, just like going to a website, instead of going to the browser, it launches my app with this URL. It's baked right into Xamarin.Forms. Now, the first thing I do is I make sure that I didn't click on my own link because that would be silly. But if I did, what I do is I say, hey, Xamarin.Forms, go to host, which is that friend/invite, and give me all the additional path and query parameters on here and just go. And this is what this kind of looks like. Inside of here, I get a link, I click on it, and it automatically takes me into the application and does the friend request for me automatically. Built right in. You can tap on that on anything. So let me show you what that looks like here. So I think it's really, really neat. Let me open another emulator. So now we have two emulators. Boom, boom, two emulators. So let's go over here into Island Tracker. And this will be Chris's phone over here, okay? And what we're going to do is go ahead and create an account. So here, account, and we'll say Chris, and we'll say user group island. There we go. And we'll hit create. Now, if I go back over into my data over here, let's list down a little bit, refresh it. We're going to see now Chris shows up right here, right? So I got two users. Now, let's go ahead and give Chris some data here. So we'll just say 50 and 80 or something like that. And we see that this is grid. It's kind of not the prettiest, grid, but we got it. Synchronize that data. Now let's go ahead and be friends. So I'm James on the left-hand side, and I'm going to say, hey, I would like for you to be my friend. So I tap on this little send button, and it tells me how to use it, and it copies it to my clipboard. I guess, I don't know, where's my copy to clipboard button? Oh, it doesn't, okay, maybe that version of Android doesn't have it. Okay, for some reason, that version of Android doesn't give me a copy to clipboard, but it should. So I have my copy to clipboard. Oh, I want it the other way. Where is the, okay, well, we're gonna do it this way, I guess. It's Android, oh. Let me try this again. Fascinating. Doot. I'm James. Friends. This one. Oh man, why is it doing it that? That's kind of annoying. There we go. Anyways, so, okay, let's say I just send him a text message. That's better. So I'm going to send him this text message. Yay. Perfect. So I'm going to go back into my app over here. Perfect. So I've copied it to my clipboard. Now, when I come into my application, let's say I just open the Friends tab, I also automatically detect if you have the information here. Or I could come in and I could also paste it here, which now I've cleared it out, so it's no longer there. So let's go ahead back and copy it one more time over here. From this, copy. Perfect. So James, I'm over here. Chris, there's my friend's code. It's nice and long. You can see what it looks like here in the UI. And I go to this page. And this page says, do you want to add James as a friend? And say, yeah, I want to add James as a friend. Cool, you send a friend request. You'll see your friend as soon as they accept the friend request in their app, okay? So I, James, I need to go ahead and request and approve that. So if I refresh this data, we'll see that it says I have one friend request here pending, okay? And if I go into my friend request table, we can see that this friend request has been made. So I have this set up where, hey, I have this friend request from this user, the public keys are shared, I'm good to go. So if I open up this friend request, it says Chris from user group Island wants to be my friend. I'm going to approve. I'm going to say, of course, that sounds good. Close it down. That request goes away. If I refresh it, it's gone. And then over here in the friend column, I refresh it. And I actually have two entries. I say that Chris is James's friend and James is Chris's friend. The reason I do this here is because it's a lot faster to query the partition key versus the row key. So I create two entries. It's a little bit of work for me to maintain them in simultaneous, but it's just an optimization I made. So I only have to query and say, give me all of my friends instead of me here or here. Like this is a unique combo over here. But now I can go in and I can hit refresh on both of these and boom, we are both friends. I have a little bit more data over here about my predictions and from here. So Chris can see my information. He can remove me as a friend. I can also do that here. I can have different toggles, like if I have, opened or closed gates or who updated today or later ones inside of here. I can see when it was last synchronized over here. I could continue to hit refresh and it's not going to hit my server because it's cached for a minute, which is nice. But if Chris was to go over and, or if James was to go over and change this to 70, for example, and hit sync, we eventually would see this update after that minute of cache is gone. So if I go into my user over here, we can see that I have AM, PM price of 70.70. And eventually, if I wait a minute, we should see 70.70. So there we go. It's bugging out a little bit, but there we have 70.70 going on there in the UI. So synchronizing that data down. But I created that friend request back and forth, synchronize it in my system automatically, all using Azure Table Storage, Azure Functions, and I have that offline complete. So if I was to take this device offline into airplane mode, and let's just say I deleted it, I'm offline, I'm on a plane right now, I could come in to my application over here and I could go into my friends and I can see that I'm completely good, right? I'm just offline. I'm able to refresh and it continues to work as is. Over here, if I attempt to do something, like let's say I try to update my prices over here to like 90, I try to synchronize, it's going to tell me that I'm offline. So I can't try to push data because I'm offline here, and it's going to stay blue because it hasn't synchronized the data here. And so that's how they'll kind of work across the scene there, which is cool. All right, so let's wrap it up here a little bit. So I think what was fascinating about a lot of this is not only the technology of how it works, but a lot of sort of unexpected learnings and guidance along the way. The first was kind of fascinating when developing this application is I just had data at first. I had raw numbers, and I started prototyping and working with Frank on some ideas of this app, and he said, your app is sort of lacking personality. You have your user profile and you can see some stuff, but what about, sort of having statuses or some way of communicating in the application? So I added these little status codes here, and we saw that inside of the profile here on the page where there's emoji status. And this emoji status, I sort of limited it, but the idea is that you could have up to 2 emojis that you could share as a status of some sort, or letters or whatever in there. And I thought that was neat, just so you could say I'm having a good day or something like that. But what I didn't recognize or realize what it could do is how users will use some of these functionalities. And I got a tweet, which was from Vanessa, who said, that she was really thrilled with the application and was debating on how to set the emoji status. And this is really cool because the emoji status that she decided to use was to tell all of her friends what was happening on her island. So for example, was the owl there Celeste so you could see the stars? Or could you buy tickets? Or where was the one sloth that comes to your island selling plants available? So that way your friends could know from a status what's going on your island. And I thought that was just like the neatest thing ever. You kind of never expect what your users are going to do to your app. But I thought that was just really neat. I also thought about, well, how am I going to promote this website? And I needed a website, and I'm not a web developer. And I found this website called apptoolkit.io. It's a little out of date now, but it actually enables you to create screenshots of your application for iOS and Android with these really cool backgrounds automatically. So when you go in the App Store, you see these all the time. It takes seconds to do for iPhone, iPad, and Android. But what it also enables you to do is create a website. When you go to islandtracker.app, it actually takes you to this website that's generated for you automatically by giving it a few assets and links to your App Store link. So it just is free. There is a paid version, but I just have a URL redirect on there, and that's it. So I thought about that before launching the app is how am I going to promote this? How am I going to send this out? And how I'm going to put it in the App Store. And I'm not an artist, but I can take screenshots and I can put a little bit of text. And that was a really neat thing that I found. Also ask for reviews. This is something that I didn't do in the beginning, and it's really easy to do. I actually have a plugin that's called the Store Review plugin. And what this does is I'm using a little setting here, and I say, if you're under 30, synchronize count. So if you've used the app under 30 times, let's see if you should do a review. So I say, if you've used the app 30 times, ask for a review. And here what I do is on Android, I ask if they want to rate Island Tracker. And if they say no, or if they say yes, then it will open the store page. Else on iOS, you can pop up this little dialog here for how many stars they want to do. So this is something I use in every single one of my applications now, but ask for reviews early because it'll definitely help you out long-term. And it's really easy to do, just a few lines of code. I like to do it after a certain event in the app. So for example, like YouTube does it after you've watched so many YouTube videos. Maybe you've launched the application so many times. But specifically, if it's an action that your users are doing, that's a good way of doing it. Also, set up CI and CD early. This is something that I use App Center for currently, and I use their analytics and diagnostics. But setting up CI/CD just really saves you tons of time. So I have a build for my master branch and for my App Store branch, and it really helps me out building, releasing. I did a beta round early with a bunch of users that really shifted how my app looked at the end of the day, the design of it from tabs, multiple tabs, back and forth. And it enabled me to distribute to my users for testing via test flight, but also enabled me directly to go to the App Store and just get things on my phone working. Found tons of bugs that way. And of course, you get analytics. So see how often your users are using, if there's crashes in your application as well. It's just a nice thing to set up and just make sure it's inside your application ready to go. But that's it. That's Island Tracker. That's how I built it. It's how it exists in the world today, out there. And it's completely out there. And that's it. And I'll take questions basically at that point. But that's kind of wanted to give you the whirlwind tour of how Island Tracker became a thing, how I built it, the resources that went into it, how it works, and the backend I created. So Thomas asks, how much effort to get it to this state? Good question. I would say it took me, I don't know. I mean, I definitely built it over like from concept to deployment. It took me maybe like 2 to 3 months, but actual time commitment, I don't know, maybe 3 to 3 weeks of development, maybe. I don't know, like 120 hours, something like that. 160. I don't know. It's a little bit hard. I mean, of course, I know Xamarin well pretty good. But of course, there's a lot of edge cases testing, things like that. It's a good question, though. But yeah, and then it's kind of self-sustaining at this point. Andrew asks, what is the key export process like? Sure, it's very simple. So I go over here and I say settings, and I say transfer account, and I say transfer to another device, and I say transfer, and it gives me a code over here. So I'll send it to this message apparently. And it just gives me a code here. And this code is like a base 64 encoded string basically that I am able to import and export. And then I can copy and paste that in and back up that code basically. It's kind of like, when you do two-factor authentication, they give you a backup code, it's the exact same thing. That was my thought at least, but that's the backup process. Yeah. That's what I thought. I have only had one person use it, so to some extent that was kind of it. But we'll kind of see in the holiday season. Right now, I put the app out for paid, and it's like 99 cents on the App Store, and I had pretty good success. I'm working on doing in-app purchases to do a pro mode and make the app free. So, I have it done. I just need to actually release it and test it and migrate. My recommendation is do one and pick one and go for it. And my recommendation is to do a pro mode in-app purchase and don't try data migration later. And it's a little tricky. So, or if you make it paid first, your backend should, have a pro table that it's tracking pro users. So that's like one recommendation. It's kind of I'm delaying doing the migration because it's just lazy to some extent. I'm not retiring off the app, so. But maybe, who knows? But yeah, that's the source code there. And of course, if you have any questions later, you can always email me as well. So that's it. Tom says, any thoughts on the new Apple privacy policy requirements that are due? I don't know. That's a good question. I don't know what they are. I guess if I go to islandtracker.app and I go to privacy policy, I have a privacy policy here that you can read. And this is my privacy policy. So it's kind of copy and paste it, but you should always have a privacy policy. It's very important to have. And this is my generic privacy policy that I have for all of them. I also have a term, where is it at? About, under about, I have my term privacy policy and terms and conditions. So I also have a terms and conditions, which is here too. So if you go to /terms, you will also see that in the application, which is a very long legal document here. And that's my PO box that's in Seattle. It's very long. I copied it, pasted it from the internet, but I need to know what it is. It's good. The new privacy policy says what data your app is collected. Yeah, I mean, you should do that inside of there. That's what this is, what I put inside of here. So user provided, what I collect, what I don't collect here. And so you should do that. But like I say that I collect, maybe collect XYZ basically in general. And I collect the same amount of data from all users in general, which is just App Center data and nothing else, but it's all anonymized. So, yeah. What implementation was done to get the bearer token? Oh yeah, super simple. So, good question. Inside of my service, where's my service at? Data service, I have a set header. So So this is pretty simple. So what I do on my bearer token on my inside the mobile app is I'm seeing, no, okay. Is I just simply get my private key. I base encode it with this ISO encoding. I get the bytes, I base 64 encode it, and I set that as the bearer token. That's pretty much off a Stack Overflow, to be honest with you. And then in my utilities, this is where I parse the token. So let me zoom out one more time here. So here inside of my Azure function, you get an HTTP request. It has a header, which is authorization. You grab that auth token, you make sure it exists. And then what I do here is I get the encoding, the same encoding from the mobile app. I get it from a base 64 encode, and I make sure that it's a GUID. So as long as you pass me a GUID that's encoded correctly, it's valid technically. But if you pass me an invalid GUID, you're not going to be able to get or set data. So it doesn't matter. The GUID matters because you're only going to be able to get data for that GUID. But this is how I parse the data in general. Very, very simplistic. It's not like encrypted or anything like that. But it's good question, Ashley. So that's how I do it. Yes, Joe, that is a good question. I would love to retire on a fat pile of bells. Haha, that's good. That's a good Animal Crossing pun. It's good. But yeah, that's how I do it there. And it's pretty straightforward. You can look through this code. You should be able to pull it down and run it. But I have a bunch of like table queries, environment variables. I really enjoyed sort of using Azure Functions as my backend here for that. So see if there's any other questions. Yeah, I mean, I feel like with privacy policies, I mean, yeah, whatever Apple tells you should probably do, I would say. But I think I'm pretty much in the clear. Oh, I'll also say that the cool part, bonus of the application being cross-platform is I tweeted out a photo, but let me see if I can find it here. But it's a little bit ago. Yes. Frank, my good friend Frank Kruger, who I've mentioned a billion times here, he bought an M1 Apple Silicon MacBook, and my application totally works, and it actually looks pretty halfway decent. I've done no optimizations, but it totally works really good. And now I actually am selling my application on Mac technically, which is really cool. So that's quite lovely that I didn't do any work. I don't think I'll do any additional work with Catalyst or Windows, but I'll just let this be, and all this stuff works. Even the deep linking, that all works 100% too, which is kind of cool. So cool. Yeah, I hope you enjoyed it. I hope it's kind of a journey in a way. I feel like sometimes presentations are like, here's how to do something, but mine is it's a little bit different. Like, here's my journey into building this app. So I hope you've enjoyed it a little bit. Real world stuff. So.
Cool. Do we have any more questions from anyone? Going once, going twice. All right. Thank you very much, James. This was really cool.
Yeah, super appreciate it. And I'm always glad to self-promote my application and kind of talk about how it was built. I don't know. It's when you build a project and you work on it for months, right? And it's been, months and months since it came out, and you have time to reflect on it. I think it's kind of fun to tell that journey. So I appreciate giving me the time, Chris.
Oh, thank you.